The boardroom's air hung heavy with the scent of polished mahogany and fresh coffee, a sterile sanctuary I'd built brick by unyielding brick. My fingers tightened around the edge of the conference table as the door opened, admitting her, Ilara Voss, the new executive assistant whose resume had promised precision, but delivered something far more unsettling. I felt it immediately, that fracture in my composure, the way my pulse stuttered against the rhythm of quarterly projections flickering on the screen. Professional boundaries had always been my armor, yet here she stood, unreadable eyes meeting mine across the room, igniting an unspoken pull that threatened everything. The silence stretched, charged. I wondered if she felt it too, this dangerous undercurrent beneath the corporate facade. My office perched on the 47th floor, a glass-walled fortress overlooking the city's relentless sprawl, where every decision echoed like a verdict in a trial I always won. Mornings began at dawn, the first light filtering through tinted panes to illuminate stacks of reports, each one a testament to the control I'd forged over 2 decades of ascent. I'd rise before the alarm, brew espresso in the precise Italian machine that hummed like a loyal sentinel, and review the day's agenda with the detachment of a general surveying battle lines. Discipline wasn't a choice. It was the cage I'd constructed, its bars invisible but impenetrable, shielding me from the chaos of human frailty. At 42, I'd never allowed cracks. Relationships were liabilities, desires, distractions that could topple empires built on calculated risks. Yet isolation had seeped in unnoticed. A quiet ache masked by boardroom victories and late-night mergers. I'd dated men once, brief alliances of convenience that dissolved under the weight of my ambition, leaving me with nothing but the echo of empty hotel suites and the sterile satisfaction of closing deals. Emotional vulnerability? A myth for lesser executives, I'd told myself, as I stared into the mirror each morning, adjusting the silk collar of my blouse until it lay flawless, a armor against the world's intrusions. The company, Apex Dynamics, thrived under this regime. Innovative software solutions powering global finance, our stock climbing steadily like the skyline beyond my window. But pressures mounted. Competitors circled, demanding sharper edges, and my previous assistant had crumbled under the load, fleeing to a quieter life in the suburbs. That's when the hiring search began, a necessity cloaked in urgency. Resumes flooded in, a parade of polished credentials, but none stirred more than mild approval, until hers. Ilara Voss, 32, Ivy League pedigree, experience at rival firms where she'd streamlined operations with surgical efficiency. Her file included a photo, dark hair pulled into a severe bun, eyes like polished obsidian, unyielding yet inviting scrutiny. I lingered on it longer than protocol allowed, a flicker of intrigue piercing my routine. What made her different? The qualifications screamed competence, but something in the sparse personal details, a single line about independent pursuits, hinted at depths I shouldn't probe. My finger traced the edge of the page, an uncharacteristic hesitation. Vulnerability stirred, rare and unwelcome, like a draft through sealed windows. I pushed it down, filing the decision for the board's review, but the image lingered through calls and emails, disrupting the metronome of my day. By afternoon, the executive team assembled in the boardroom, the space transforming from neutral ground to arena. Glass walls reflected our silhouettes, suits crisp, postures erect, as projections hummed to life. "We're introducing Ilara Voss today," my HR lead announced, voice steady. The door swung open again, and there she was, stepping into the light with a poise that commanded silence. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, each step measured, her tailored navy suit hugging lines that spoke of quiet authority. I straightened, willing my expression to neutrality, but inside, the sanctuary trembled. This woman, with her calm demeanor, threatened to redefine the boundaries I'd sworn to uphold. She moved with an economy of motion that bordered on elegance, her presence slicing through the boardroom's anticipatory hush like a well-honed blade. Ilara Voss settled into the seat directly across from me, her posture impeccable, spine aligned as if gravity itself deferred to her command. It contrasted sharply with the coiled intensity I'd cultivated, a perpetual undercurrent of vigilance that kept my world in orbit. I nodded to the HR lead, signaling the formalities to commence, but my gaze lingered on her a fraction too long. Those obsidian eyes, unreadable yet piercing, holding mine without flinching, as if she were assessing the very foundations of my authority. "Ms. Voss," I began, my voice steady despite the subtle tremor in my chest, "your background at Thorn Enterprises was impressive, streamlining their acquisition pipeline by 40% in under a year. What draws you to Apex Dynamics specifically?" The question was routine, a probe into loyalty and fit, but as she leaned forward slightly, the faint trace of her perfume wafted across the table, jasmine laced with something earthier, like rain on stone, disrupting the sterile air of coffee and printer ink. It clung to the space between us, an invisible thread pulling at the edges of my focus. She met my eyes directly, her response measured and incisive. "Apex represents the pinnacle of adaptive innovation, Ms. Hale. Your vision for integrating AI into financial modeling aligns with my expertise in operational foresight. I'm here to anticipate challenges before they manifest, ensuring your directives execute without friction." Her words carried a subtle undercurrent, not deference, but partnership, shifting the power dynamic ever so slightly. I felt it in the way the executives around us leaned in, drawn to her clarity, as if she'd already begun reshaping the room's energy. I nodded, masking the way my pulse quickened beneath my cuff, a betrayal of the control I'd wielded so effortlessly until now. The Q&A unfolded with precision. Queries about crisis management, confidentiality protocols, her approach to high-stakes deadlines, but each exchange amplified the tension coiling within me. She answered with poise, her hands gesturing minimally, fingers long and steady as they traced the edge of her notepad. I watched, transfixed, as she jotted a note, the pen's soft click echoing like a metronome against my accelerating heartbeat. The floral notes of her scent lingered, weaving through the projection's glow, making the glass walls feel closer, more confining. Questions from the team probed her resilience under pressure, and she countered with examples from boardroom battlegrounds, her voice a low contralto that resonated in the quiet spaces of my mind, stirring an ache I hadn't named. As the session drew to a close, I dismissed the team with a curt directive. "We'll reconvene tomorrow. Ms. Voss starts immediately." And they filed out, murmurs of approval trailing them. The room emptied, leaving us alone amid the humming screens and scattered agendas, the silence stretching heavy and charged. She gathered her papers methodically, but paused, her gaze lifting to mine once more. In that lingering glance, I saw it, a flicker of mutual awareness, her composure cracking just enough to reveal depths mirroring my own unrest. Neither of us spoke, but the air hummed with unspoken recognition, a fragile thread binding us in this corporate cage. Days blurred into a professional rhythm after that. Agendas aligned with mechanical efficiency, her presence a constant undercurrent in my periphery. Yet, as deadlines loomed and the quarter's end demanded exhaustive collaboration, late hours beckoned, pulling us into the isolation of the executive suite, where boundaries might finally fray. The executive suite fell into hush as the city lights bled through the glass walls, casting elongated shadows across my desk, like fingers reaching for secrets I kept buried. It was past 10, the office emptying of its diurnal hum, keycards beeping farewell, footsteps fading down corridors, leaving me alone with the quarterly reports, their pages a labyrinth of figures that demanded dissection. I leaned back in my leather chair, the material creaking softly under my weight, and rubbed my temples. The numbers blurred under the dimmed desk lamp, a single pool of amber light fighting the encroaching dark. Control had always been my refuge, but tonight it felt tenuous, frayed by the day's relentless cadence and the undercurrent Ilara had introduced, her presence lingering like an uninvited echo in my thoughts. A soft knock shattered the solitude, precise and unhurried. "Come in," I called, my voice steadier than the flutter in my chest anticipated. The door opened, and there she was, Alara, balancing a stack of files under one arm, her silhouette framed by the hallway's fluorescent glow. She moved with that same measured grace, closing the door behind her with a quiet click that resonated in the stillness. "I compiled the supplemental data you requested," she said, her tone low and even, crossing the room to place the files on the edge of my desk. Up close, in the lamp's intimate circle, her features sharpened, high cheekbones shadowed, dark hair escaping its bun in a single tendril that brushed her collarbone. I nodded, gesturing to the chair opposite, but she remained standing, organizing the documents with calm efficiency, her hands steady as they aligned edges and tabbed sections. I watched, unable to look away, as her fingers, long, capable, smoothed a crease in the top report, the paper yielding to her touch with a faint rustle that seemed amplified in the quiet. It was innocuous, that sound, yet it stirred something primal, a whisper of heat uncoiling in my core. The proximity of her body to the desk's edge brought her scent anew, jasmine mingling with the crispness of fresh print, invading the space I'd claimed as solitary. "Thank you," I managed, pulling the top file toward me, forcing my eyes to the projections within. But as she leaned in slightly to point out a highlighted anomaly, "Here, the variance in the European projections. It stems from overlooked currency fluctuations." Her arm brushed the air near mine, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. My breath hitched, imperceptibly, but I felt it, that jolt threading through my veins, challenging the iron discipline I'd armored myself with. We delved into the analysis, her insights cutting through my assumptions like a scalpel through silk. "Your strategy assumes stable market sentiment," she observed, her voice a contralto that vibrated softly, drawing my gaze upward. Those obsidian eyes held mine, unblinking, as if she could see the calculations not just in the data, but in the spaces between us. "But with the recent policy shifts, we need contingencies, perhaps hedging through diversified portfolios." She was right, of course, her mind a mirror to my own, but sharper, unclouded by the fatigue gnawing at me. I countered, defending the core model, but the words felt labored, distracted by the way her lips formed each syllable, the subtle rise and fall of her chest beneath the tailored blouse. The paper rustled again as she flipped a page, her hand grazing the document's surface, and I imagined those fingers on something more yielding, the thought sending a flush creeping up my neck. I shifted, crossing my legs to quell the unwelcome stir, willing my focus back to the figures that blurred under her steady scrutiny. The clock on the wall ticked onward, each second amplifying the isolation. The suite a cocoon where professional lines blurred into something perilously personal. Her gaze never wavered, challenging me not with confrontation, but with an intensity that peeled back my layers, exposing the ache I'd long suppressed, the longing for connection amid the empire's cold heights. I battled it silently, redirecting to safer terrain. Timelines, deliverables. Yet the heat built, unspoken, in the narrowing space between us, her proximity a magnetic force pulling at the edges of my resolve. As midnight crept in, the reports lay half-dissected, our dialogue tapering into contemplative pauses. She straightened, gathering a stray pen, and I realized how deeply she'd embedded herself, not just in the work, but in the quiet fractures of my sanctuary. The session wound down, exhaustion mingling with this new tension, and I rose, signaling the end. "We'll reconvene in the morning," I said, but my voice carried a huskiness I couldn't mask. She nodded, her eyes lingering a beat too long, that mutual awareness flickering again. As we stepped toward the elevator, the clock's final toll echoing, the descent into the night promised further isolation, where the pull between us might intensify beyond retrieval. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, swallowing us into its mirrored confines, the descent from the 47th floor a slow unraveling of the night's tension. I pressed the button for the lobby, the panel's glow casting faint reflections on our faces, mine taut with the effort of composure, hers serene, almost contemplative, as if the isolation suited her. The doors sealed us in, and the car began its smooth plunge, the hum of machinery a low counterpoint to the silence that thickened between us, heavier than the air in my office had ever been. I stood at one end, arms crossed to anchor myself, but the space felt oppressively intimate, walls closing in like the boundaries I fought to maintain. Her presence filled it entirely, that jasmine scent now mingled with the faint trace of ink from the reports, wrapping around me like an unspoken invitation. She shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing the railing, and broke the quiet first. "Tonight's projections were tighter than anticipated," she said, her voice low and measured, carrying through the confined air like a secret meant only for me. "Your instincts on the hedging were spot on. Most would have overlooked the volatility." It was professional praise, delivered with that contralto resonance that vibrated in my chest, but laced with something warmer, an undercurrent that made my skin prickle. I nodded, eyes fixed on the descending floor numbers, willing the ride to end before the pull intensified. "The market's unforgiving," I replied, my tone equally restrained, though my pulse betrayed me, thudding against my ribs. "One misstep, and it all unravels. Pressures like these test the limits of control." The words hung, double-edged, mirroring the internal storm she unwittingly stirred. Work pressures were the safe harbor, but beneath them swirled the forbidden currents of this attraction, pulling me toward depths I'd mapped but never navigated. As the car slowed at an intermediate floor, empty, no one entering, the silence deepened, amplifying every nuance. The soft rhythm of her breathing, the subtle creak of her leather bag against her hip. I glanced sideways, catching her profile in the mirror, lips parted slightly, eyes distant yet aware, and felt the age gap yawn between us like an abyss. At 42, I'd built an empire on discipline, my life a series of calculated elevations with no room for the vulnerabilities of youth. She was 32, sharp and unscarred, her poise suggesting a freedom I envied, a life unbound by the chains of relentless ascent. 10 years separated us, not just in chronology, but in the worlds we'd inhabited. Mine, a fortress of boardrooms and solitude. Hers, perhaps one of untested horizons. The undercurrents were dangerous. Power imbalances that could shatter careers, whispers of impropriety in a firm where optics ruled. Yet in this suspended moment, the forbidden allure hummed, a tangible thing coiling in the space between our bodies, tempting me to bridge it despite the peril. The elevator lurched faintly, a routine adjustment, and in the shift, her hand reached for the control panel at the same instant mine did, to steady myself, an instinctive gesture. Our fingers brushed, accidental yet electric, her skin cool and steady against the warmth of mine, sending a jolt straight through me like current arcing across exposed wires. I froze, the contact lingering a heartbeat too long before we both withdrew, the air crackling with the aftermath. My breath caught, a sharp intake that echoed in the quiet, and I saw her eyes widen fractionally in the mirror. Mutual shock, or recognition? Before she composed herself, that unreadable mask slipping back into place. The touch was fleeting. Professional accident in a shared descent. But it seared, awakening a desire I'd armored against. The ache for her calm hands on more than paper. For the unraveling she promised without words. I turned away, heat flooding my cheeks, the mirror reflecting my flushed composure cracking like glass under pressure. She cleared her throat softly, resuming as if uninterrupted. "Your leadership navigates those pressures with a grace few possess," she added, her voice warmer now, laced with genuine admiration that softened the edges of her reserve. "It's not just strategy, it's vision, unyielding yet adaptive. I've seen executives falter under less, but you endure." The compliment landed like a caress, subtle and probing, stirring the longing deeper. It wasn't flattery, but insight, as if she'd glimpsed the isolation fueling my drive. I met her gaze briefly, the obsidian depths holding mine with an intensity that mirrored my turmoil, and murmured, "Endurance has its costs." The doors finally parted in the lobby, cool night air rushing in like reprieve. But as we stepped out, the brush of her hand near mine in passing reignited the spark. Routine meetings awaited the dawn, briefings, alignments, but each small interaction would layer this desire, weaving it into the fabric of our days until the boundaries frayed beyond repair. Daily briefings became the subtle architecture of our evolving dynamic, Ilara arriving each morning at precisely 7:45 with a tablet humming under her arm, anticipating my needs before I voiced them. She'd slide the device across my desk, screens already alight with curated summaries, market shifts annotated in her precise script, potential pitfalls flagged with quiet foresight. And I'd find myself relying on that rhythm, her efficiency a lifeline amid the deluge of decisions. It wasn't overt, this fostering of dependence. It wove in gradually, her presence a steady counterpoint to the chaos of ringing lines and urgent emails, until I caught myself scanning the doorway before the clock struck, the absence of her click-clacking heels a void in my periphery. The office, once a solitary command center, now pulsed with her unspoken reliability, each briefing peeling back another layer of my isolation without a single breach of protocol. In meetings, her formidable presence amplified the undercurrents I'd begun to navigate, a silent force reshaping the room's gravity. Seated to my right during strategy sessions, she'd interject only when precision demanded. Her voice, that low contralto, resonant and unhurried, cutting through the executive's bluster with incisive clarity. "The data suggests reallocating resources here," she'd say, tapping a projected graph, her finger lingering on the screen just long enough to draw my gaze, the timbre of her words vibrating through the air like a plucked string, echoing in the hollows of my longing. I observed her then, the way her dark hair caught the overhead lights, a single strand rebelling against the bun to trace her jawline, and felt the power she wielded not through dominance, but through quiet command. It mirrored my own intensity, yet softened it, challenging me to yield fractions of control. Internally, I wrestled with it, this admiration bordering on ache, her unreadable eyes flicking to mine during lulls, holding a depth that suggested she sensed the fracture lines in my facade, the way her competence stirred vulnerabilities I'd long entombed. A shared coffee break, one overcast afternoon, marked the first true breach into personal terrain. The executive lounge, a neutral ground of leather armchairs and panoramic views, steam rising from our mugs like tentative bridges. I'd sought refuge there from a grueling negotiation, the city's gray veil mirroring the fatigue etching my features, when she entered, 2 cups in hand, black for me, her own laced with a hint of cream. "You looked like you needed this," she said simply, settling into the chair across from mine. The gesture intimate yet professional, her knees angled just shy of brushing the low table. We sipped in companionable quiet at first, the rich bitterness grounding me. But her presence invited confession, the jasmine of her perfume mingling with the roasted notes to create a sanctuary within the sanctuary. "These walls demand everything," I admitted, staring into the steam, the words slipping out unbidden. "Boundaries aren't just lines, they're fortifications." She nodded, her eyes steady on mine, revealing nothing, yet inviting all. "And yet, they isolate," she replied softly, her voice a caress against the vulnerability I'd exposed. "I've learned to guard mine fiercely, but not at the cost of connection." The dialogue unfolded haltingly, tracing the edges of our worlds, her transitions between firms, the solitude of high-stakes roles, each revelation a thread tightening the bond, her restraint mirroring my own, yet laced with a warmth that coaxed deeper disclosures without demand. That moment of vulnerability crystallized later that week, during a rare lull in the lounge's hush, when burnout's shadow finally surfaced in my weary exhale. "There was a merger 3 years back," I confessed, fingers tracing the mug's rim, the porcelain warm against my cooling resolve. That nearly broke me. Nights blurring into weeks, the weight of it all pressing until I questioned every assent. She listened intently, her posture unchanging, yet her gaze softening, obsidian depths absorbing my words like ink on vellum, offering no pity but profound understanding. "Endurance like yours comes at a price," she murmured, her pen clicking idly on the table, a sharp, rhythmic punctuation that echoed the longing building within me. Each snap a reminder of her steady hands, the calm that steadied my unraveling. No advice followed, just that attentive silence, her voice timbre lingering in the air, low and resonant, weaving through the escalating sensory tapestry, the faint rustle of her blouse as she leaned forward, the subtle shift of light on her collarbone, all amplifying the ache of proximity without touch. In that exchange, boundaries revealed themselves not as barriers, but as invitations, her listening a mirror to my hidden fractures, fostering a reliance that transcended the professional veil. These subtle connections, layered day by day, her anticipation in briefings, the formidable grace in meetings, the shared confessions over cooling coffee, each interaction blurring the lines I'd drawn so rigidly. The pen's click became a motif, a harbinger of her nearness. Her voice, a low hum underscoring my thoughts. The jasmine, a persistent undercurrent stirring the longing I'd armored against. Yet, as a crisis project loomed, a high-stakes client pivot demanding extended collaboration, the boundaries began to blur irrevocably, pulling us into uncharted hours where the corporate cage might finally yield to the pull between us. The crisis project descended like a storm front, a pivotal client pivot that demanded our undivided immersion in the executive suite's dimming lights, far beyond the standard 9-to-5 fortifications. We'd commandeered the conference room adjacent to my office, its long oak table strewn with printouts and laptops, the glass walls fogging slightly from the heat of our focus as evening bled into night. Alara and I pored over the critical report, a dense matrix of financial projections and risk assessments for the merger that could redefine Apex's trajectory. Our chairs drawn close enough that the space between us hummed with the residue of those subtle connections, her anticipation now a necessity in this high-stakes unraveling. I traced a column of figures, my pen hovering, when she leaned in from across the table's edge, her shadow falling over the page like an extension of her formidable presence. "There's an error here," she said, her voice that resonant contralto slicing through the quiet, pointing to a misaligned decimal in the acquisition valuation. "It cascades through the entire forecast, overstates liquidity by 7%. I followed her finger, the document's crisp edges catching the lamplight. But before I could respond, she reached across, her calm hands descending to correct it directly on the shared printout. Time dilated in that instant. Her fingers, steady and unhurried, smoothed the paper flat, the faint rustle amplifying in the charged air, jasmine weaving through the scent of ink and aged wood. Then it happened. Her hand brushed mine as she marked the adjustment with a precise notation, a grazing of knuckles so fleeting yet indelible, her skin cool and assured against the sudden heat flooding my own. The contact was electric, a surge that arced through me like exposed wiring in a storm, igniting an internal tempest I'd armored against for years. Desire uncoiled, raw and unbidden, a profound ache blooming in my chest, radiating downward until my breath shallowed, the room's confines pressing inward as if the glass walls themselves conspired to trap this revelation. I'd known discipline as my unyielding ally, but here, in the innocence of professional correction, her touch unraveled it, exposing the longing I'd buried beneath boardroom victories, a yearning not for conquest, but for the vulnerability her poise promised, the strange magnetism that had simmered since her first step into my sanctuary. Dialogue faltered, the words I'd prepared dissolving on my tongue as our eyes locked across the report's expanse, obsidian meeting the storm in mine, the acknowledgement charged and wordless. In that suspended gaze, I saw it mirrored, the subtle widening of her pupils, the faint parting of her lips, as if she'd felt the jolt too, the undercurrent we'd both navigated now cresting into something tangible, a shared recognition that peeled back our facades. The pen slipped from my grasp, rolling forgotten across the table, its click a distant echo to the pounding in my veins. Neither of us moved, the silence stretching heavy, laced with the weight of what this meant in our corporate cage, where power and propriety intertwined like vines threatening to choke. Her hand lingered near the page, inches from mine, the proximity a torment that deepened the emotional chasm, stirring visions of those calm fingers tracing not numbers, but the contours of restraint I'd long enforced. I pulled away first, abrupt and masked as retrieval of my pen, the withdrawal of physical ache that echoed the deeper fracture within. "You're right," I managed, voice huskier than intended, forcing my gaze back to the figures. But the correction blurred under the onslaught of realization. This wasn't mere admiration. It was desire, profound and undeniable, awakening parts of me I'd deemed dormant amid the Empire's demands. The isolation I'd embraced as strength now revealed itself as a cage of my own devising, her touch the key turning in its lock, flooding me with an ache that settled low and insistent, a sanctuary breached by the very competence I'd hired her for. Reflection deepened it, wave after wave. The age between us, the imbalance of authority, the peril of indulgence in a world where whispers could topple thrones. Yet in the quiet that followed, as we resumed the analysis with mechanical precision, the grays replayed in my mind, each recollection intensifying the storm, her unreadable composure a mirror to my cracking resolve. The session dragged on, corrections integrated, but the aftermath lingered like smoke from a hidden fire, the professional veil thinning with every shared glance, every rustle of paper that evoked her hands. As we packed the files hours later, the city's lights twinkling indifferently beyond the glass, I felt the facade splinter further. This pull, once subtle, now demanded reckoning, threatening to redefine the boundaries that had defined me. The morning after the report's grays dawned with a deceptive calm, sunlight slicing through the blinds like accusations I couldn't evade. I'd arrived early, the office still shrouded in pre-dawn hush, but Alara's presence already permeated the suite, her neatly aligned files on the side table, a fresh pot of espresso brewing as if she'd anticipated my insomnia. The touch replayed in relentless loops, her fingers' cool assurance igniting echoes that disrupted every attempt at focus. I paced the glass confines, the city's indifferent sprawl mocking my unraveling. When she entered at precisely 8, tablet in hand, the air thickened immediately, tension palpable as humidity before a storm, her obsidian eyes meeting mine with that unreadable depth, acknowledging the fracture without a word. She closed the door softly, the click a punctuation to our shared silence, and approached my desk with measured steps, her navy skirt whispering against her legs. "The revisions from last night are integrated," she said, voice low and even, placing the updated report before me. But her hand lingered on the cover, inches from where mine rested, the proximity reigniting the charge. I nodded, throat tight, unable to feign detachment any longer. The professional veil had thinned to translucence, exposing the ache she'd awakened. "Ilara," I began, the name slipping out huskier than intended. "About yesterday, that moment." She straightened, composure intact yet her gaze softening, a subtle shift that invited confession. The space between us was charged, heavy with the unspoken, her jasmine scent weaving through the espresso's bitterness to coil around my resolve. She stepped closer, perching on the desk's edge, her knee brushing the arm of my chair in accidental intimacy that sent a shiver through me. "I've admired you since the boardroom," she confessed, her contralto resonant in the quiet, words laced with a sultry warmth that peeled back my defenses. "Your unyielding grace under pressure. It's formidable, indelible. The way you command without raising your voice, navigate chaos with such precision. It's unsettling how it draws me in." Her compliment landed like a caress, subtle yet probing, stirring the longing deeper. I felt exposed. The isolation I'd armored as strength, now a vulnerability she illuminated. Our eyes locked, hers holding mine with an intensity that mirrored my turmoil, the air humming with mutual recognition, no longer veiled, but acknowledged in the narrowing distance. Reciprocity surged, unbidden, the words tumbling forth in a rush of unfamiliar candor. "I feel it too," I admitted, voice trembling at the edges, the confession a breach in my fortress. "This longing, it's new, profound, an ache I've never known. Your calm, your insight, it disrupts everything, makes me question the boundaries I've enforced so rigidly." Vulnerability hung between us, raw and electric, her expression softening further, a flicker of shared unrest in those obsidian depths. She reached out then, her hand settling gently on my arm, fingers warm and steadying against the silk of my blouse, the contact a lifeline amid the storm. It was innocent, professional in intent, yet it seared, her touch grounding the emotional torrent, thumb tracing a subtle circle that amplified the intimacy without demand. The sensation radiated, a profound peace warring with the undeniable magnetism, her skin's assurance against mine awakening sensations I'd long suppressed. Dialogue flowed haltingly from there, words weaving around the unspoken rules of our world, power imbalances, career perils, the corporate cage that forbade such fractures. "We can't ignore this," she murmured, her hand lingering, voice a sultry thread pulling me closer. "But denying it, that isolates us both." I nodded, the weight of her touch anchoring me, confessions heightening the intimacy as we skirted the precipice, her admiration for my endurance, my revelation of the solitude fueling it, each exchange a step deeper into the forbidden. The pen on my desk clicked idly under her free hand, a rhythmic echo to my quickening pulse, jasmine and warmth enveloping us in this private sanctum. As the conversation tapered, resolve flickering with possibility, she withdrew her hand slowly, the absence an ache. "There's an industry gala tonight," she said, eyes holding mine with quiet invitation. "Black tie, networking veiled as celebration. Would you consider attending with me? As colleagues, of course." The suggestion tested the fragile line we'd towed, promising proximity beyond these walls, where the pull might intensify unchecked. The gala's opulent hum faded into memory as I returned to the office alone, the city's neon veins pulsing beyond the glass like accusations of the evening's restraint. I'd attended with Ilara, our arrival as colleagues a careful masquerade, shoulders brushing in crowded lobbies, her hand steadying my elbow during toasts. But the proximity had only amplified the unresolved pull, her sultry confessions from the morning replaying amid champagne flutes and veiled negotiations. Now, past midnight, the suite welcomed me back with its familiar hush, the desk lamp's amber glow illuminating the unfinished report, a silent summons drawing me into the isolation where boundaries dissolved. I sank into my chair, fingers tracing the document's edge, the paper's texture evoking her calm hands, when the door opened without a knock. Ilara, silhouetted in the hallway's dim light, her gown traded for a simple blouse and slacks, eyes unreadable yet intent. She closed the door, the click a punctuation to the tension that had simmered all night, stepping forward with that measured grace that unraveled me. "I couldn't leave it like this," she said, voice softening to a contralto murmur, crossing to the desk where the report lay between us like forbidden fruit. The gala, it only sharpened what's unresolved. The air thickened, jasmine lingering from the evening, mingling with the suite's cool sterility to create a cocoon of charged intimacy. I rose, drawn by the magnetic undercurrent, our bodies inches apart in the lamplight's intimate circle. Dialogue escalated haltingly, voices lowering as power dynamics surfaced raw and unarmored. "This imbalance, me above you, the rules we navigate," I confessed, the words a tremor against her proximity. "It terrifies me, yet your presence demands I confront it." She nodded, obsidian eyes holding mine, her breath a warm cadence in the quiet. "Power isn't ownership. It's shared in moments like this, where vulnerability equals strength. I felt it too. The pull, the fear of what yielding means in our cage. Her hand extended, tentative yet assured, fingers brushing mine over the report's surface, the contact reigniting the graze from days before, but deliberate now, entangling slowly until palms pressed, skin to skin in a grip that anchored the storm within. The touch was profound, her calm seeping into my trembling resolve, thumb tracing a subtle vein on my wrist that sent electricity arcing through me, awakening the ache I'd armored against. We stepped closer, the desk no barrier, her free hand rising to cut my cheek, cool fingers against heated skin, a gesture that peeled back the final layers of restraint. Our lips met tentatively, a brush at first, questioning, then deepening as emotional release flooded the space between us, her mouth soft and yielding yet commanding, tasting of lingering champagne and unspoken longing, the kiss a sensory immersion that blurred the corporate veil. Jasmine enveloped us, her hair's silk against my temple, the faint rustle of fabric as bodies aligned, hearts sinking in rhythmic urgency. Yet we held the precipice, no further bounds crossed, the intimacy a release without consummation, her touch a sanctuary amid the peril. In that suspended union, desire's truth resolved internally, a profound peace settling over the turmoil. I'd never known this depth, this electric vulnerability, her unreadable facade cracking to reveal a mirror to my own hidden fractures. Yet professional fear lingered, sharp as the glass walls enclosing us, whispers of scandal, the empire's fragility under such indulgence, tempering the bliss with reality's edge. We parted slowly, foreheads touching, breaths mingling in the afterglow's hush, her eyes searching mine with quiet promise. Dawn's first light crept through the panes as we lingered, hands still entwined over the report, a new reality dawning not in conquest, but in the fragile awakening of connection, where the pull between us promised both salvation and ruin. Our fingers intertwined over the report's forgotten pages, her calm anchoring my awakened storm. A connection profound, undeniable, blooming in the corporate cage we'd both reshaped. If this slow burn unraveling stirred your heart, subscribe for more Sapphic tales that explore forbidden desires and emotional depths.